The character concepts that we want to play don't always fit in a single class. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a way to play it, it just means it's time to get weird. Now, this video isn't necessarily going to cover specific multi-class combos because we've already made a video like that for 5th edition. However, I will still provide examples of what I'm talking about to help illustrate my points. I will be using Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition as a reference point. However, I believe that the tips that I'm going to share with you can be applied to any character build in 5e, other tabletop role-playing games, and even video games that haven't even come out yet. Pretty cool, right? Let's start at the beginning of making a character, and I'll use my character Vale from Ancient Relics and Hokey Religions as an example. The potential for light spoilers does exist, but only if you haven't seen past episode 14. My initial concept for Vale was I wanted to play an elven archer that had some magic. So my options were ranger or fighter, and then I just said, you know what? I'd like to do things just a little bit differently, so I went with fighter. Then I took one look at the arcane archer subclass and decided that was not for me, and I landed on the eldritch knight. And this is kind of where the fun begins for me. So naturally, I built up my dexterity and intelligence like a good power gamer should, but then a marvelous storytelling opportunity presented itself to me that I just felt like I could not ignore. And I did something that's really weird. I multiclassed into Warlock. So there I was with 2 spell lists to manage, 2 spellcasting modifiers to consider, and the potential for an extremely janky build. I don't know if you've ever found yourself in a situation like that, and if you have, I sure would like to hear how you handled it in the comments section, but for me, the big key that I had to focus on was keeping the main thing the main thing. At his baseline, Vale is a fighter, so the primary thing he's going to do with his action is take the attack action, and since he's an archer, he's just going to keep shooting things. And I really do think that it's important that you remind yourself of things like that as you're kind of mapping out how your character is going to be built or played out at the table, because if you don't do that, you're going to start to lose control and things are going to get out of hand. And there could be a decent chance that you're asking your dungeon master if you can play a different character. Since one of the big things in my concept that I have for Vale is casting spells, I started to look for spells that would enhance his combat abilities, but because his main thing that he does in combat is take the attack action, I looked for things that would be like reactions, bonus actions, anything like that that could help augment what he primarily does, which is just deal damage. And I think that's important for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, the initial fantasy that I have is playing an elven archer, so I want to shoot things repeatedly and shoot them with a lot of arrows dealing a lot of damage. So that's just what I'm going to have fun with because that's how I first envisioned my character playing out. And then the other thing, from just like a pure strategic numbers game, if I don't take the attack action with my character, I'm taking all that potential damage that he can deal during his turn off the board because I'm doing something else. That's not something you're going to be rigid with because, of course, things happen and you got to do what you got to do. But just from a theory standpoint, this is just a solid concept to consider. So I landed on some spells like Shield, Absorb Elements, those kinds of things that will just help my character be effective and do things that I want him to do. And now on the Warlock side of things, man, my charisma was not bad. I think it was a 12, and I'm pretty sure that I had to ask Josh if I could raise it a point just to qualify, and I was still learning how to use D&D Beyond at the time, and so I didn't even know you could turn that off. But I was like, Josh, I think I need to do this because it won't let me take a Warlock level, and he's like, yeah, whatever, it's still a +1, I don't care. So for me, the key with picking Warlock spells was spells where my modifier just didn't matter. And frankly, not really all that surprising to me. I was able to find a lot of spells that I found interesting for Vale. I found things like Comprehend Languages, Find Familiar, there's things like Featherfall. There was a lot of options that didn't take my action in combat, I found interesting, and my modifier didn't matter. And now, all of a sudden, my vanilla fighter, who typically is supposed to only be useful in combat situations, has a very rich suite of non-combat options that can help the party. Which, if you think about it, Whoever thinks about multiclassing a barbarian into a caster because you can't rage and cast spells? However, if you don't expect to do that in combat, it's not so crazy. So what did I lose by doing this? Well, I guess the coolest thing about being a fighter is that eventually you start to get like even more than one extra attack, right? You get 3 attacks at level 11, and then if you do get to level 20, you get 4. That's kind of really cool. And if I were to look at it that way, then I would feel like I lost something. But in my mind, he was becoming something else, almost like this arcane version of a paladin in a way, sort of something a little funky. He's a little weird. But if I just set my expectations in a different direction, now all of a sudden I'm looking at my character and thinking like, he's so unique and cool, and I'm just having a blast playing him. So now we come to this concept of setting our expectations for the character that we're going to play. And the best way to do that is to just first understand the rules. Yes, we're going to continue using 5th edition as an example, but this really does apply to any tabletop role-playing game, video game. It doesn't matter. If you understand the mechanics of how the rules work, you're in great shape. And if you're interested in learning more about 5th edition rules, Josh and I did an entire series on the action economy, and I highly recommend that you check it out. I think the first step on this journey is to think about the primary thing that your character is going to do. And in 5th edition terms, that's what are you most likely going to use your action for when you're in combat? And for me as a fighter, that's attack something. So that was really easy. After you have that solid concept down, that's when you just start to look for secondary things that can either enhance what you primarily do or just fill in gaps and be effective in other ways. In 5th edition, we're looking at your bonus action and your reaction, and in my concept, spells like shield, absorb elements, anything like that will work. And I also even have a homebrew spell called Chromatic Charge, which works out kind of like an arcane smite. And if you ask nicely in the comment section, maybe I'll post a link there. As you're looking over your options, you probably will eventually reach this concept that I like to call, if some is good, more isn't always better. And there are some combinations that say on the surface look really good. Like for example, if you multiclassed a monk and a rogue, they both use dexterity as like their primary thing. So I think on the surface, you'd think that's probably a good idea. But then when you look at the cunning action of the rogue and all of the martial arts features that monks get, I have a feeling, because I've never played this before, but I have a feeling that you're going to end up favoring monk things or rogue things more often than the other, depending on maybe your initial concept. Actually, if you have played this combination before, I would be very curious to hear about it in the comment section, because I think sometimes you can create a log jam, whether it's your bonus action, your reaction, whatever it is, and then you get this sense that like you're missing out on something. And I don't want you to miss out on anything. I want you to have fun. One last thing I want to talk about when it comes to setting your expectations and just this line of thinking and how it actually can apply to any character you make, not just multi-class ones. If you are constantly negatively comparing your character to some other options out there, there's a good chance you misread something. Now, I know that might sound like a very Captain Obvious-like thing to say, but this concept actually can be a little sneakier than you might think, and I think a very good example of this is the 5th edition Warlock. If you pick up the Warlock and want to play it like you might play a wizard, another, primary spellcaster that has this full suite of spell slots, you're probably going to be disappointed. However, if you look at the Warlock as this incredibly cool Eldritch Blaster, reliable damage dealer, you realize this actually kind of plays out a little bit more like a warrior class, and instead you also get the ability to do things like move creatures back into like AoE damage effects or whatever nasty things you and or your other party members have set up. You start to realize that you have a little more control over the battlefield than maybe another martial character might. Or you actually even then look at the weird short rest spellcasting that they have as like, hey, this is almost kind of like a really cool bonus. It changes your perception of the character when your expectations are in its proper lane. Anyways, I want to hear all about weird combinations that you might have played in the past. I'm talking horror stories or things that worked out really well. And while you're down there, let me know that you made it to the end of this video by posting 3 of your favorite emojis anywhere in the comment, beginning, throughout, at the end, it doesn't matter. And if you're looking for something fun to watch next, check out the Action Economy series. You won't regret it.